today's guest is David Conover, owner of Studio Conover. All right, David, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you. Respectfully, konnichiwa, right?
Yeah, I love it. And just looking at your background, you say on your profile, innovative instructional designer and educational technology leader. I love those things, design, technology. Although I have to admit, on the design side, it's just more of a fan. I was never a very good designer in any capacity. Technology, maybe I had some areas where I was more proficient than others. But tell me about that background.
Well, I mean, as soon as you say designer, um, I've been doing this since I found out what graphic design was at Arizona State University in 1973. That's many moons ago, and I'm happily saying I'm a graphic designer today because there are so many flavors of design, as you know, especially in 2025. And I identify as a graphic designer at this point. My wife and I started the studio in 1985 after meeting at the graphic design department at Arizona State University.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Now, you know, the fundamentals of design. I mean, I know a little bit of the design, but have they changed? Much. I mean, since when you started, not the technology aspects or whatnot, but some of the fundamentals. Have you noticed anything that has shifted? And I'll give you an example. I mean, this
Okay.
is just cultural difference. Like when you go to Japan, you mentioned konnichiwa, right? So, um, what's considered great design, and maybe that's changed a little bit because I haven't been as close to Japan recently, is a little bit more cluttered, design, a lot more detail, seems to be more trustworthy. Whereas North America design always has been, how can we keep it clean, space and stuff like that. But within what you've seen, some of your fundamental design things, has there been any basic shifts, or has the fundamentals for you stayed the same?
I think the fundamentals have stayed the same, but what's interesting is you're identifying something that I would almost feel is the exact opposite of what I've felt. When we visited Japan with my family a couple months ago, I felt a very pragmatic, austere, simple presentation, everything from menu design to car design to anything else that was in the built environment. And here in the United States, if anything, I see it sort of as an amalgam of a number of different cultural styles. So I find it fascinating to hear that
Mm,
you're seeing some of the more simple Bauhausian, is that even a right word? Like, form before function. I resonate with those. I remember teaching the history of graphic design, which um, I renamed sort of the history of design because it encompasses more than graphic design.
yeah.
And I realized when I was teaching Dutch design that I was resonating with that because of the straightforward, simple sans serif approach that many of the Dutch designers do. And my own heritage is Dutch, and I found it fascinating that I hadn't really learned it, but it must be within my DNA to sort of feel that way. Now, part of it is the fact that maybe I have ADD, which I always joked was a dyslexic acronym for dad, but I think I need a simple solution because I believe that breaks through. I cannot be a Latin designer, which is very flourished and very complicated. I'm not necessarily a designer who can deploy a number of different um, sentiments. I sort of feel like I'm kind of like Helvetica. Have you ever seen the movie Helvetica?
I have not.
It's a fascinating movie if you ever get a chance to. So, okay,
Interesting.
that's a long-winded way of answering your question. I think the fundamentals are there, but what's interesting in practicing it over the years, you start realizing what you didn't recognize early on in your career because you were sort of, uh, I don't want to say working in the dark, but you were learning as you were going. I think the one challenge with design schools today is they probably teach more of the design and less of the marketing and business acumen aspect that really is necessary for any of us, let alone somebody who wants to start a small design studio.
Yeah, that's really interesting. When you were giving examples of Japan, you were to me, that was like I heard packaging design, product design, right?
Hmm.
And when I was my bias is I was always thinking interactive. I've always thought the
Ah,
interactive online stuff was a lot more cluttered and cleaner. Maybe that's changed, but in Japan, the product design and the packaging design is immaculate.
it really is. Absolutely, as well as all the building signage and everything, which is many of the stores have been anglicized and they have such wonderful names that translated bring a wry smile to my face. And even the T-shirts and the shirts that the youthful marketplace purchases can give you a smile from that standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we go into, your involvement in construction and building materials, um, you know, walk me through, every time there's technology that comes out, right? Like I remember like Illustrator and those Adobe things. Oh, the designers are going to be out of business, and now there's the AI that's designing, with text and stuff like that, and they say, oh, the designers are going to have less to do. Like walk me it's never happened, so walk me
No, it
through
hasn't.
where the value of the individual is, and the what is it, the positive side of that, or the negative argument for that. Tell me both sides of that.
Well, I think as I as I've been doing this for many years and I age, I have to remember the zeal that I have for the new technology of 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and still want to embrace it as well as learn it. It becomes a little bit more difficult as you age, as you can imagine, because of the aptitude and the confusion, but also the desire. So I really need to stay current in that respect. So to go through the laundry list of the technologies that I've embraced and have transitioned to is what many have that have been doing this for 40 plus years from pre-computer. And you're right, as soon as the Apple Macintosh came into play, and it specifically went to the publishing industry and printers, we all felt that um, that would be the death knell to the old typesetters and the old strippers, as we called them, who put up the negatives on the plates and burned the plates. And to a certain extent, that particular uh, 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 discipline and profession did wither, but it necessitated every printer and every designer to not go and typeset typewritten manuscript. They had to learn how to do it on their computer. And there was incremental change over the years so that you could enjoy it a little bit at a time. Now it's become so complex that it really warrants my greater attention to it because there is a myriad of messages and directions that can be done. I'm always a little bit more bemused by the fact that, you know, I would like a single way to get to a solution, and yet all the software, as you know, has 7 different ways to do it because there's 7 or more different opinions about how it should be done. I get that.
Yeah. So how did you get into doing things around construction and building materials?
Well, as I mentioned, my wife and I started the business in 1985. We were lucky enough after going out to a Vietnamese restaurant here in San Diego and having maybe our first and maybe our second Vietnamese coffee, which if you've ever had is can really amp you up. And she went back to the design studio that she was working at. She said, I'm quitting right now. And I was independent and working with a quorum of independent designers. And I said, oh, we're going to start a studio. And she said, yes. And I'm going to ask the client that I've been working with to join us. And he did. And that particular client was a home builder, a very well respected home builder in San Diego. And after doing the marketing and signage and brochures and branding for them, he came to my wife and he said, you have done such a good job on that. What do you think the color of our houses should be? And of course, every designer, when asked a question about aesthetics, no matter what field, they're going to give an opinion, as you well know. And what happened is she parlayed that into an exterior design career. Now, what's an exterior designer? That is a person who does the same thing on the outside of a building as an interior designer does on the inside. We don't realize it, but the business Castagra is in, you realize that people have to make decisions about what color should the roof tile be, what color should the window mullions be, anything on the outside. There wasn't many people doing that. This is a long way to get to the answer to your question. There wasn't many people doing that. So consequently, we would have sales rep that would come into our office and bring their brochures pre-computer. And we would be able to say, that's not really very good. We can design better marketing materials for you. Now, when we started our studio, as you can imagine, we were generalist, and you compete with everybody who's doing healthcare and home building and any of a number of SIC niches from that standpoint, and which was good when you have a small studio and you don't have children and you don't have a car payment or a house payment. Then all of a sudden you start doing work for a specific category. This instance being building materials, and we got good at that. Then all of a sudden we started realizing to be a specialist in something gives you a little sort of an added advantage where you can go to find more work based upon your experience and expertise. So that really is why we've done it. I was thinking of you the other day when we were talking about your roof coatings, and we've done work from companies that have done elastomeric roof coating to manufactured stone veneer and pavers. Did I know that in school when I was hoping I was going to be designing album covers and ski graphics? No, but it's incumbent upon me to be excited about any work that I'm doing so that I can solve what I think is the challenge. And that's what keeps me inspired is the curiosity of how something can be better, not just looking better, which we really like, but also functioning better.
Yeah. So I get it though. If you're gonna start an agency or a design agency or any type of agency, also have another business that is the customer of your customer.
It's pretty good to be able to have to be able to say to building manufacturers, you market to us, so we can see it from that side, so we know how to turn it over and market to the specifiers of your product.
There you go. That's the right way to vertically integrate.
It was sort of happenstance. I don't think we necessarily did it on purpose. I now know more about color than I ever did 20 years ago, and I can see the nuance between, a white that has a little bit of a blue undertone versus a warm undertone. We all are amazed when we go look at the paint swatches in Home Depots and Lowe's and probably think that's a heck of a lot of choice there. But you can imagine how specific we can be when we're talking with manufacturers. And it's beyond just specifying for projects. We work with manufacturers to repurpose some of their products a roof tile, for instance, that might have a combed scrape on it so that it's got texture on it. We come up with some of the colors that are part of the colorways for manufactured stone. And it's been really exciting to work in this field. And as you can imagine, as you well know, there's thousands of manufacturers of building products out there that need our help.
There you go. Um, yeah, I think you mentioned, having this structure where you're on both sides of it wasn't something that you planned. It happened. Isn't that the case in so many businesses? You try it or you happen to run across it, and but you capitalize in it because you see it's working. I mean, do you have other examples where, hey, you discovered things that, in the beginning just kind of looked like, something normal, or maybe, didn't look like anything at all, but it turned into something that, you ended up doing regularly because it worked.
That's a good question. I paused for a second because I'm trying to think about it in context with maybe some of the work that we've done that isn't necessarily in the building products
Sure.
business. We partnered with a local independent theater in town, the San Diego Repertory Theater, and we because we're always asking the question why, so much to the point that sometimes maybe I ask why too often. But I think in that context, we were able to determine that the normal course of marketing materials that we were producing got expanded a little bit because we realized that the reach and the eyeballs that could be seeing some promotion might be beyond sort of the typical fare that had been done previously. I'm not sure that answers your question. I'm trying to think about it, and it might be one of those situations where I've got to text you at midnight when I have an epiphany. Aha!
Well, I mean, with colors and all those choices, right? Like fonts, I mean, just amazing number of choices. How do you I mean, before there was, all these books that say, "Okay, with this type of font, you get this feeling and that feeling." I mean, at some point, with the sheer number of choices, how how do how do you start with the client, with so many different directions you can go?
Well, I think that's evolved over time too. I think to a certain extent, I'm in this business because I am sort of a people pleaser, and I like producing work that people enjoy. Much of my wife is exactly the opposite. She knows one idea and she's like the velvet hammer. She'd hate me saying that. She can do one idea and sell it in that respect. But it took me a while to realize that freedom from choice is oftentimes even better, because when you're submitting five, six, seven, eight ideas, you're confusing the people that you're working with. So you
Yeah,
can narrow that down. And to a certain extent, I would take it even a step further in saying we really don't polish the work when we first present to a client first, because I think that's a time consuming scenario. And if you don't get any feedback and you polish something and present it to somebody and they go, this is not it at all, then you've wasted a good amount of time. I'm a big believer in the collaboration between ourselves as well as the people that we're working with. And consequently, I'm a big believer in what I call the napkin sketches. Let's get some buy in and some consensus
yeah,
with some early just iterations that aren't really indicative of what the font choices are,
yeah,
so that and it's a very subjective thing, when you go back and then present something and they go, well, I don't really like that color, red, and you said, yeah, but we talked about something that was alarming, so not many colors are alarming like a red color is. And so I think if you can take an objective strategy and subjectively put what we believe is a beautiful outcome,
sure.
you're better apt to sell it.
I guess that's true in so many things, right? Where if you polish it too much, there's not that collaboration. If you just get some stuff going, show something, whether it's a document, whether it's a design in its rough form, maybe just the goal is just to have the conversation so that you start to collaborate to come up with something or at least figure out what you don't want.
And I think what the other opportunity that that provides, and I'm very transparent about it, is I would say to you, euphemistically, you're my client. When you're engaged with me and giving me your ideas, and I listen to that context, it's going to be easier for you to feel comfortable because A, you've been listened to, and B, you kind of have some ownership of the idea that it is in the first place. So why spend an inordinate amount of time doing something completely different that may or may not stick when you present it? And I think to a certain extent, I don't know if it's true of every design school, but I would hope that most design schools don't do what I learned, which was to polish it prior to collaboration and intent and strategy.
Sure, sure. Tell me how you see all this technology and AI factoring into how the design area is going to evolve.
I see that there's challenges with the intellectual property of everything, and I hope that there's going to be the guardrails, as they say, that are put up that'll give artists that are creating things a little bit more control over the work they've done. I don't know if that's true with everything being scraped now and every instance that's happening. I would much rather live in the world of the positivity and the optimism of what it can bring because I've experienced the optimism of the personal computer. I've experienced the optimism of the desktop video editor. I mean, you can remember you do a lot of videos. The hiring of all the people beforehand was remarkable, and I love working with people. Don't get me wrong, but as soon as somebody says you can edit something on a laptop bay at midnight and not worry about it going elsewhere, you're going to be encouraged to do that yourself because we all probably are poor time managers and we have to get something done at midnight. So I'm fascinated by what it's become. And for the little pieces that we do, whether it's generative fill or AI replacement of some audio that you've done, or even from the standpoint of, obviously Chat GPT is the one that everybody's talking about. And Chat GPT is not too dissimilar to me looking at the thesaurus and looking at reference books and everything. It's just collapsed the time. But every technology has done two things, as you know. It's collapsed time and money necessary to do the finished project. And I can guarantee you that Gutenberg, when he was doing his Bible and the scribes in the churches were nervous about it, similarly, they had the same thought that, oh no, now we're out of business. We're not going to be doing illuminated manuscripts anymore.
Yeah,
Well, that
one
was
thing for sure,
true.
we know that things will be different and we all need to evolve and adapt, right?
Evolve and adapt, and I'm loving the idea of trying to do my best to learn it. Now, part of the problem that I have, and my kids roll their eyes, is I'm the guy who asks, why is that happening? Versus they just intuitively just fulfill the task that's necessary. And I will be forever the guy who says, why did they make that change for software, for instance? Um, just because I've had muscle memory of interfacing the UI this particular way, and now you've completely turned it upside down and you're making me relearn it. And I would always say, just because you program it for 8, 10 hours a day doesn't mean I spend that amount of time with this particular software program. So I do get frustrated in that respect. And I try to do it from a design standpoint. The hierarchy that we have with the websites that we program, there's another technology. I say the personal computer. When we first started designing websites, it was pages, and then it became Flash, and then it became hard coding. Now we particularly are doing WordPress, and I know there's a lot of different flavors out there, as I've said, but I still like to make it look good, but I also think it needs to be intuitive. And I think that's the thread that goes through any good design is the intuition as to what you need to do to begin and end needs to be, in my mind, obvious as well as beautiful.
Yeah, interesting. Any trends or anything you see in and around construction or building materials that you've noticed through your clients?
Well, I think from a trend standpoint, again, I'm a print designer. I'm a linear page one to the back cover kind of guy. I think as far as trends, I'm wondering if there's any data that tells us that we are being inundated with digital because it's simple and it's easy to craft marketing and send it out. And yet, I wonder how effective that really is. I'd like to believe that a well designed brochure for a manufacturer of a building product, which is clothes on the mannequin, so to speak, because it's a beautiful picture of the product in place. I'd like to believe that that is still in play. So I hope that the trend is there's different marketing um, um, platforms that different specifiers would like to see. And so consequently, one of them still would be print as well as digital. I do realize now we do much less spec bindings than we used to. You probably have a whole wall full of all the binders from all the manufacturers that had to put all the ASTM documents in there and everything. And now everything, it used to go onto a little thumb drive. Nobody's got that anymore. It's now just all populated on the website. But does that give you the tactile feel? I think that's the one thing that we always wanted to do whenever we worked with a roof tile manufacturer. I remember specifically saying to him when he said, the brochure that we did before was hard stock white clay coated brochure cover. And I said, but that doesn't feel like your product. Don't you want to get something tactile and very rough hewn and everything so that when somebody's feeling it and looking at it, they get a subconscious sense of what you're producing. So that's a
Well,
long way to answer your question, but I still think that those are valuable because people love beautiful things.
yeah, I think with every trend, there is an anti-trend, and you can be different by doing things. That's not the what's the right word? You can be different by sticking with something that people have moved off of too, right? So it's just different ways to get people's attention.
Right. I don't think I'll be doing any illuminated manuscripts with the Catholic Church for any brochures, but nonetheless, I think people do enjoy getting printed a printed piece that speaks to them.
Yeah, very cool, David. Your wealth of information, you could probably talk for hours on specifics. But is there anything that else you wanted to share that, through I mean, you've obviously been at it a very long time when you mentor people and stuff. Any common questions that you find yourself answering to close off?
Well, I think from the standpoint, since we're a small studio and we're much smaller today in 2025 than we were in 1995 for various reasons, I really am the type of person that likes to mentor young designers because I believe that for them to continue as a profession and in a career, it would be great to work with somebody who's had some of the chops and the pains and the heartache. Uh, so I constantly am trying to work with a young designer um, but I ask them to be my eyes and my curiosity too, because they're looking and seeing things that I don't normally, in the channels that I look at that I don't see. And so I'm really engaged in, if they can come back with the passion, oh, I've just seen this. And I'm talking about something like a video technique, for instance, that you and I spoke of that was 5 years ago, where we've got the jump cut editing. And at first it looked disarming. And yet that's kind of what AI is doing, because it's stripping out all the ums and ahs. And if we go herky jerky back and forth 5 years ago, we're like, that's very odd. But now we see it as sort of been normalized, to use the word. So that example is when I want somebody to come back and say, oh, did you happen to see how that was edited? Or did you happen to see the leading of that particular brochure, the distance between the two lines of copy? I look at somebody and go, you're really got an eye on things, and I appreciate it. So, because a lot of this is, as you can imagine from a design standpoint, is input, digesting it and then outputting it in a way. And I think we've done a pretty good job of seeing trends, looking at interesting new styles, and translating that so that in the marketplace, if you show a brochure by StudioConover next to other ones, you can see that there's a dramatic difference.
Yeah. Well, the best type of mentoring works in both directions.
It does. That is true.